G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic midweek. Now of course legends, I'm on my third day of my fourth round of chemotherapy. Now we are changing some things up. I was in this morning in the chemo ward for an infusion of drugs and fluids to try and at least keep me in somewhat of a way that I can get through the remainder of the treatment. Of course, all of this is trying to counter how unwell the chemo drug actually makes me. And the biggest problem I've had is due to my nausea and all the other sicknesses, I can't get any fluids, therefore any of the drugs actually down. So we're trying to counteract that somewhat. So it'll be interesting to see how I go tomorrow, but I will keep you updated. And of course, legends, today we have, as always, a lot to go over. We will look at maps, geolocations, and compare maps, as the maps aren't super clear today as to what is going on, and there's a lot of differing information, but we will talk about it. It's important to actually get an idea of what then is happening. We, of course, need to talk about the minerals deal going on between the US and Ukraine and how that is still on the table. We need to look at what Zelensky has said in response to, of course, the disastrous Oval Office spat that occurred last week. We need to talk about peace deals, peace negotiations, security guarantees, and we need to look at this of where is maybe Europe sitting, where is the US sitting, and of course the forgotten party in all of this is then Russia. What would Russia actually agree to? Because I think it's being forgotten that if there is a deal right now, well, it can't just be fully one-sided. You either have to win the war and then it is fully one-sided, or negotiation means negotiation. I think a lot of European leaders need a dictionary or a thesaurus more so than they need more shells or factories or energy. But of course, we will go over all of that. Legends, you may remember very recently that I said that the informational space is going to get more and more nasty, and we have seen public figures have their personal data get leaked recently. But this also happens if you've got little to no public account as well. I'm sorry to tell you, but it is highly likely that your personal data is being bought and sold online right now, right as we speak. Data brokers, they collect your information, scammers then exploit it, and hackers, they're just waiting for the right moment when the walls are down. Your home address, your social security number, your phone number, even your financial details can be exposed and exploited. And once they're out there, well, they're nearly impossible to remove. And like in my case and many others, we wouldn't even know where to start looking. Well, you can be absolutely helped by today's video sponsor, Aura. Aura is your all-in-one digital security solution. They have a data broker removal tool, so they help erase your personal information from any shady businesses, no matter where it is. They also have a credit monitoring tool, and you can get critical mobile alerts via the app on the go if your data is leaked, so you can get on top of it as soon as possible. And you can use their VPN to stay private online, but you can also just use it as well to get your favourite Netflix or Stan shows from different areas in the world. And also using their parental control features, you can keep your kids safe from online threats. I use Aura and I recommend to all of my friends that they do as well. So stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches. Go to my sponsor, aura.com/WillyOAM to get a 14-day free trial and see if any of your data has been exposed. Thank you, Aura, for sponsoring this video. Now, of course, this is where I want to start. So I want to talk about the minerals. We'll look at what Zelensky has said in response, of course, to that disastrous Oval Office then press conference. We'll talk about that. We'll break that down. We'll look at then where Putin may be sitting on these negotiations. We'll talk about military aid and intelligence. And then we'll talk about, of course, what Trump has just said at Congress. I was waiting for that to finish up so we could get an idea of what was actually said. Ukraine now plan to sign the minerals deal. Now, this is talking about in Congress, so we'll go over what was said, but realistically, nothing groundbreaking as far as minerals was said in this. But when asked on Tuesday about the minerals deal, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Fox News there is no signing planned. So again, we do not know. But what I will say with this minerals deal is, regardless of what you think of this, I don't see what other options Zelensky has, especially now that the US want to cut or halt military aid, or has cut at least some. We don't know about the intelligence and some of these soft assets. We don't actually know how far this goes. RBC Ukraine, they are reporting it like this: the US continues to provide intelligence to Ukraine, and this is coming from several sources in military political circles, and they say, as for the transfer or exchange of intelligence information, the Ukrainian authorities have yet noticed any changes there. Everything is still the same as before. So what comes under intelligence? Well, we don't really know. Is that everything from satellites to Starlink to communications? We don't know. But what I've said is too many people are focusing on the hard assets as tanks and bullets and bombs, and not on what the US, and solely the US, can provide in that intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, satellite, signals intelligence, electronic warfare, what they provide there. Even just Starlink. If Starlink was to be switched off, and we know exactly how Elon Musk feels about this conflict and how he feels about Zelensky, of course, though, that is on contracts. It's not his sole decision, but if that was to be cut off, that would be catastrophic almost instantly. It doesn't matter how many reserves of equipment if it can't bring it into the fold, from using GPS munitions to then satellite data and tracking of the Russian forces, as well as Starlink to get drones up to even see those forces too. Now, this is in then another article, but to do with the hold of military aid. People's Deputy Member of the Rada Defense Committee, Fyodor Vanilevsky, he has said, I think that Ukraine definitely has a margin of safety for about half a year, even without systemic assistance from the US. But it will, of course, be much more difficult. So he's saying there's about 6 months worth of aid to go. Now, that figure I would question, because we're already seeing then the front line moving rearwards. And of course, what we saw last year was we saw how bad it got, how quickly, when there was then delays in military aid, not cut off. And will Trump ever actually switch that back on, or is this forcing Zelensky's hand on the table? Well, we will see. So let's continue on some of these minerals. And this is the second part of that Reuters article. US officials have in recent days spoken to officials in Kyiv about signing the minerals deal despite Friday's blow-up, and urged Zelensky's advisors to convince the Ukrainian president to apologise openly to Trump. This according to people familiar with the matter. Now, what we know is that Trump, he wants an apology. And Zelensky has said in a post it was time to make things right, although this is definitely stopping short of an apology. We'll go through all of that in a second. It is unclear if the deal has changed, of course, this of the 50% of future monetisation. That said, with how it went, maybe it will even be a worse deal. Of course, this should be a threat and should be seen as a threat to Ukraine's further sovereignty as well, because of course this gives massive leverage over Ukraine's assets, its minerals, its resources. But the problem is, I don't know how else this can be done. This is the problem of not being self-sufficient, and very, very few countries are actually self-sufficient. But some countries, and India is the example we give, have a healthy balance of sufficiency. So they get some equipment from China, some from America, some from Russia. They get some of their energy from America, from Russia, or from other players. So no, not one single party can have such an influence. This is the problem, say, in Australia, is a huge amount of our economy. People say Australia is a Western country with an Eastern economy, is that China could have huge influence on our economy like that if they wanted, but also America can have huge influence on us militarily. So you get that, and this is the problem that I foresee, is that now Trump can sort of just, how hard does he want to push? You know, huge amount of military aid, all of the top-end intelligence and live tracking is all the US on critical minerals too, that it's all in one basket, if that makes sense. France, Britain, and possibly other European countries have offered to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, but would want support from the US or a backstop. Moscow has rejected proposals for peacekeeping troops, and also Australia has said that we may look at sending troops as well with our European allies. But again, this always comes at the annex of, as long as there's US support, and people are forgetting that also, well, I don't believe that at this point in time, in the position that Putin is in, that he would agree to that. I don't see why he would agree to that. This is where I opened this video with saying I think people are forgetting that negotiation has to involve both parties with a mediator. The mediator at this point will be America, and America is wanting an end to this straight away. So different positions on the battlefield, well, it's not going to change that quickly. If anything, it's going to deteriorate further. And this is where many will say, and I'm in this basket, that you're better off doing the negotiation early, because the longer this limbo carries out, the worse position Ukraine may actually be in. The psychological impact on the soldiers at the front, because of course for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, and this is where I see a lot of this psychological impact on soldiers at the front line, is with US pulling support with how it's looking, an unfavourable negotiation process. How is this going to affect the soldiers who have given so much on the front line from the Ukrainian side? On the other side, you see then the Russian forces, they may be going, well, we're going to be up against a less fierce enemy due to they won't have that American maybe intelligence or the American weapon systems, and it might be our last time to actually sign up and get a hold of that amount of money that's never been available before in Russia. So you can actually have an opposite reaction here, and this is where I said I think it is in Zelensky's interest, if this is where the US is going, try and get it done as quickly as possible, but it would be in Putin's interest to try and drag this out as much as possible. And the way Putin will do that is through elections. And of course, we know how Trump feels about elections occurring in Ukraine. Now, Zelensky posted this on his Twitter, and this will become relevant when we talk about Trump at Congress as well. I would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace. None of us wants an endless war. Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership and to get peace that lasts. Now, what I would ask is, does Europe share this vision of having peace come as soon as possible? We're ready to work fast to end the war. And the first stages could be the release of prisoners and a truce in the sky. Ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy and other civilian infrastructure. Of course, energy is a dual-use item. And a truce in the sea immediately, if Russia will do the same. Then we want to move very fast through all next stages and to work with the US to agree to a strong final deal. We do really value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence. Of course, this is what Trump and Vance both had spoken about, saying that Ukraine wasn't as appreciative of the support as then Zelensky should have been. And we remember the moment when things changed, when President Trump provided Ukraine with javelins. We're grateful for this, a point Trump made in that then infamous meeting. Our meeting in Washington at the White House on Friday did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. We would like future cooperation and communication to be constructive. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time and in any convenient format. We see this agreement as a step toward greater security and solid security guarantees, and I truly hope it will work effectively. Of course, that could have been done last week. So let's look at my breakdown in this and how I see where this is pushing and pulling. This does stop short of the apology that we know Trump and JD Vance have asked for. And it's not taking responsibility for what has occurred in the Oval Office. Now, people have different then opinions on who is responsible for this, but we know where Trump and JD Vance see the responsibility falling. Our meeting did not go the way it was supposed to. This is a huge understatement. Although there are some striking parts in this statement. I believe the most striking part is Zelensky's explicit openness to negotiations, which is a dramatic shift from his previous stance that Ukraine would not negotiate with Putin until Russia withdraws or Putin is replaced. That said, if Zelensky wants to enter this, he and then the Rada, they have to change laws to be able to negotiate with Russia, because currently it is illegal, and Russia has raised concern that if it is illegal in your country to do so and then you step into it, further down the line you could maybe nullify that negotiation, maybe once we've already withdrawn or deals had been signed. Appealing to Trump, the mention of President Trump's strong leadership and the reminder that Trump was the one who provided javelins, a point Trump often used to defend his Ukrainian stance, is clear flattery. Of course, appealing to Trump's ego. ceasefire proposals. The suggested truce in the Sky and Sea is a clever diplomatic move. It sounds, though, like a major concession, but is actually a relatively low-risk step for Ukraine. If Russia were to agree, it would ease the pressure on Ukraine's defences. If Russia refuses, Ukraine can claim they are willing to talk, but Moscow wasn't serious. Of course, who holds the upper hand in these domains, from POWs to missiles to strikes to drones? It is Russia. So, of course, that's where that it seems maybe a massive concession, but is low, high risk, but also can turn back on Russia and say, well, they are then not willing. So the Security and Minerals Agreement, the willingness to sign the Minerals and Security deal in any time and format seems like a desperate attempt to keep the US support intact. Ukraine's critical mineral reserves are highly valuable to the US, so this is essentially then reaching out an olive branch to Trump. Of course, that has hugely shifted to anywhere, anytime we will sign this, seeing how important that is, especially if the US start leveraging, okay, then we just will withdraw this aid that you are solely reliant on. And the foreign thing here for the US administration, or foreign from allies looking at the US, is the US for decades has not leveraged its full capacity against allies in tariffs or military. The US is now doing this, and of course, it's very foreign to leaders and then countries outside of the US, and they are seeing this as like, holy shit, what is going on? Just look at between Trump and Trudeau at the moment. The question is, though, how will Trump take this? What bridges have been burned? And maybe what are Trump's requests now? How will that minerals deal look now that things really fell apart? So let's firstly talk about then Trump at Congress, what he has said. Now, this isn't word for word. I typed this as quickly as I could, but it is close enough. It is words to the effect of, if you will. But he said there is no end in sight. We've sent hundreds of billions with no security on that money. Saying, do you want it to keep going for another 5 years? Of course, do you want the war to continue the way it is? He says 2,000 people are killed each week, Ukrainian and Russian young people. I want it to stop. Meanwhile, Europe spends more on Russian oil and gas than they've sent to Ukraine. And he calls this out, and he's been doing this on Twitter as well. Of course, we know where I speak of Europe's rhetoric versus reality, and this is a great point of that. And I speak a lot about what these European leaders say about the existential threat versus what they're actually willing to then do. He again reiterates that we've spent $350 billion. They, being Europe, they've spent $100 billion, and saying that the money from Biden to Zelensky was like candy from a baby. Earlier today, I got a letter from Zelensky. The letter we went through was the Twitter post. He said, I appreciate that he sent this, but he didn't touch on that much more. Simultaneously, we've had discussions with Russia. They are ready for peace. He says, wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't peace be beautiful? He said, it's time to stop this madness and end the killing. If you want to end wars, you have to talk to both sides. But in this, if you want to end wars and end them quickly, you need to take into consideration how both sides are sitting right now. And this is where many, and I believe correctly, said at the end of 2022, that was the best chance of the deal, because where we saw the issues in the Russian armed forces and where Ukraine had recent successes, opposed to what we are looking at now, that Putin will definitely be stepping into this with more cards than Zelensky will. And of course, we know where Trump sit on that, because he has said, well, you don't have the cards, Zelensky. And Trump, he's going to be the one mediating this, because, well, we have seen that a lot of the European nations, the big players, they are not ready to mediate this from a position of reality and a position of actually ending the guns firing. They're ready to mediate a strong, lasting peace from a position of power, which in turn means there's going to have to be probably years or years more of military actions, if possible at all, but you are gambling that it could be in a worse position. Again, I will say, I think historically, in 10 years, maybe a century, people look back and go, the European Union, they had their fingers in all these sorts of pies, and they could have ended it way sooner, but they were willing to sail down the bloody path or down the river to the last Ukrainian for their own goals, and were focused on principles being victorious rather than military actions and reality. Now, The point being missed here across all of this, from then Zelensky's post, where Europe sits, and I think how people are interpreting this, is with any ceasefire deals and proposals to end then strikes or swaps or anything, you also need to convince Putin of these terms. Trump wants to mediate the deal to the end of the war, but he acknowledges that Putin is in a position of power, aka holding the majority of the cards. The proposals around long-range missiles, they benefit Ukraine more than they benefit Russia. But of course, informationally, that can backfire too. But with the entire West, even now Australia, wanting to deploy peacekeepers in Ukraine, why would Putin agree to these terms given in his current position? So in the current position of power on the battlefield, why would he be agreeing to a negotiation that has these elements? Now, it doesn't matter how you feel. You need to look at what is happening on the ground and the position that Putin is in, where Trump is sitting, and the willingness of Europe to continue the fight and the ability of them to continue the fight too. So in war, militarily, this is your stick. Negotiations, this is your carrot. Europe's stick isn't big enough. The US's big stick, it isn't available, as we have seen with things getting cut off. And my point is that if negotiations take place while Putin is in a tactically and strategically stronger position, he and Trump, they will dictate the initial terms, is where is Russia willing to settle. That will be the initial phase of the negotiation. And Europe, with Ukraine, then they will try and negotiate them back to the best possible outcome for them. But I don't think people can say, it doesn't matter how you feel, Ukraine is not going to be dictating at this point in time. They are not going to be dictating the terms. It will be Trump and Putin in that position of power dictating, because this is what Ukraine wants to do. They want to be in a position of power, so they are dictating the terms to Putin. But with Putin's in the position of power, it's the exact opposite, that they will be dictating and then trying to get the best deal out of that. And Trump, he just shows he just wants to end the war. And I think Trump's fear of China, Trump's fear of then breaking things like NATO apart and more divisions happening there that Russia can then lean on, I think he is willing to make a lot of people very upset and territorial ambitions then not reached to have a settlement there to maintain US global hegemony. So, of course, let's look onto the maps. Of course, we have Kyiv in the center of your screen. We have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, the maps today will see no red check on the deep state, blue check on this is, of course, Ukrainian advancement, where red would be Russian advancement, but we do see increase in grey zone and some blue that isn't blue check, so I'm not sure if that's meant to be over 24 hours or a map correction or something older than 24 hours. I'm somewhat unsure on how to read into some of this. But let's first come then down into Pokrovsk, as we do have a few updates around here as far as blue and grey zone movement. So let's focus firstly on Uspanivka. So we see Uspanivka right here that we go to yesterday. We see where Russian control is, and then till today, we have then Uspanivka has come back under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces, as we have seen Kotliny and Pishani, where Ukraine has had some advancements in here then very recently. Now, many are saying this is because there are troops withdrawing out of Kursk down into these areas as well, or Russia has moved some troops around there. So again, we will see, but we can see that. But of course, just down to the south of here, around Andriivka, we can see an increase in grey zone as well. But I do have in Andriivka a then geolocation to show you. So just at this location here, of course, to the north of Constantinople, to the southwestern side of Andriivka, we see in this footage here taken by Russian drones at about the 3-minute 13 mark, I believe, after a number of drone strikes. We then see numerous flags going up to confirm where these forces are. Of course, I show footage that is relevant outside of where the maps are showing us and where the maps may catch up in the future. There are multiple flags going up around, of course, this front line. Of course, this is putting pressure all the way down into the south on Velyka Novosilka, and of course flattening and leveling the front line up into Pokrovsk as well. Remember, things push and pull all over the front line, and I think Kursk is a big one for this at the moment. As we have said, Kursk, if Russia planned to take this back militarily, it has lost its strategic cards of being something to swap. So has Ukraine been then maybe moving some resources out of here, but at the same time, Russia then moving resources in to collapse this. But we do see today on the northeastern side that there is some ground made by the Ukrainian forces. Of course, we saw 41 to 44 square kilometers come back under control of the Russian forces in here yesterday around Sverdlikovo, and potential crossings shown by grey zone back into Sumy too. What we may see though, because we do know that informational warfare and propaganda does and has influenced command decisions, could we see a further deployment of resources in to hold this? And again, you know exactly how I feel about that. So let's look then at what Suryak Maps says about this. And he shows, of course, the same ground we spoke about yesterday coming back under control by the Russian forces, but also this crossing that we have spoken about down into Sumy as well. The Russian army took control over half the locality of Zurava at Sumy Oblast. During the last 4 days, Russian forces took control of this forest and several positions north of Lebedivka. In addition, the locality of Krylova was completely retaken. So we can see crossings into Sumy being claimed as well, and more down into this direction, of course, putting pressure on these roads into Suja. And of course, the biggest element in here that we see is these roads, and this is accepted by everyone. These roads are under a hell of a lot of drone and artillery fire control, making any deployment of resources into here or pulling out of resources very difficult and very costly as well. And this has been the case for a long time. It's just getting accepted now at this point. But we have seen just from the geolocations, have a look at military summary, he keeps up on those every day, dozens of vehicles being struck in that area. Now, we come back down an area we haven't spoken about in a while. It's just north of Kharkiv, of course, the Vovchansk and the Lipsia front, that Suryak Maps is claiming that Russia has had some level of crossing here as well. So let's have a look at this. And just in this direction out here, the Russian army entered Ukrainian territory to take control over the border crossing south of here without resistance. So just a small crossing in here. Again, is it relevant at this point in time? No. Could it expand? Potentially. Could it draw forces from somewhere? Maybe as well. Again, this is what we speak about. If you are numerically superior, this is the sort of warfare you can do, is just do small probing attacks like this and make resources move around the battlefield. If you are numerically larger, and then therefore your numerically inferior enemy will have to move elements around, then thinning out on other front lines. And I would not be surprised at all to see Russia push in just a random spot. They may not need to, because Kursk has basically done that for themselves. Now let's talk then about in the northeast. So we see blue on this map and a reduction in the grey zone here too. So of course this is where Russia has crossed the Oskil and made this large bridgehead. Today's Deep State map is claiming that this forest area has come back under control of the Ukrainian forces. Let's then move our way further down, and we need to come down into Terny Ivanivkia front. Now the grey zone has expanded here out to the west. So we see where it was yesterday and then out to the west of this side. Now, let's have a look in the same direction on Suryak, that he is showing that there was a Russian advancement here. Grey zone movement on the Ukrainian map, then neutral map showing Russian advancement. I'd say is likely to see a red push in here in the next coming days. Now, let's move further down into Toretsk. And of course, Toretsk is one of these areas which is incredibly hard to know what is going on at the moment with the amount of conflicting reports. So let's open Suryak and see what he is saying is going on. The Russian army managed to expel the Ukrainian army from the outskirts of this mine. Of course, these maps are showing vastly different. AMK mapping shows very similar to Suryak. So Toretsk at the moment, what is going on? Very hard to tell. We will wait for more maps actually showing similar pictures as well as further geolocations as well. And then we need to come down right into the south. And what we are looking for is Lobkove, Stepove. Of course, what we have seen in here is Russia increase its bombing campaign, as well as it has increased some localized attacks in here. But we have also heard that Ukraine may be redeploying forces from Kursk or other front lines into here. This is an area where a lot of critical resources sit, and with these critical resource deals, Ukraine will want to hold on to more of this and may forego then the leverage of Kursk to try and maintain the minerals down in this front line. So this is the area we are talking about, this Sherbaki front. Zaporizhia front at the beginning of March. Russian army made small advances south of Shabaki. So what we need to line up is, it's hard to see the exact roads in here, but we can see where then there's like a creek line running down. So it's just in this sector right in here where it's said that there are some advances. Of course, this whole southern front from Robotny through to here to Lobkove shows vastly different across different maps. Anyway, legends, you have a fantastic day. And if I don't speak to you tomorrow, well, I hope that you have a great day as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.